Hello everyone and welcome to the den. Today I'm going to be canning beef stew, so stick around if you want to see how it's done. Alright, so I've gathered up all my ingredients for this recipe, and you can find, I think you can find a beef stew recipe in most canning books, but I'm going to use this one, Ball's Blue Book Guide to Preserving. The only difference, there's going to be a couple differences that I'm going to make, a couple changes, swaps. I'm not going to use potatoes, I'm going to use mushrooms instead of potatoes, but everything else is pretty much going to stay the same, except I'll probably add, I definitely am going to add some garlic to mine for seasoning, and that's going to be about the only change. And I'm going to do beef broth for my water line, and I'm not going to heat this up before. I'm going to pack this raw, so I'm going to get my beef bouillon going on the stove, or my beef broth, and I'm going to get all my veggies washed and cut up. So I have my mushrooms, I have my carrots, I have my celery, and I have some onions, and I also have a couple of round roasts that I'm going to chunk up, and that's going to be the base of my beef stew. So I'm going to get all of this prepped up, and I think that you can kind of figure out how to prep your own, but you're just going to slice in, you know, smallish slices. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done, and then we're going to get those jars packed up and get them in the canner. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Alright, so I have all my vegetables cut up, and I just did a thin slice on them. So all my vegetables are right here, and I'm just going to start jarring. But the first thing that I'm going to put in my jars is my meat, because I like to get that done first, and then I'll move on to all the vegetables. So grab a jar and grab a funnel, and I have about 4 pounds of meat here, and I'm just going to do up to about a quarter. I have a little bit extra, so I'm going to do about a quarter in each one. I'm just going to wing it. And the reason why I'm not going up halfway up the jar is because I have an extra vegetable than I would for my chicken soup base. And this is kind of a similar recipe to that. It's just beef instead of chicken. So I'm not going to put as much meat in these as I would those, because I'm going to be adding the mushrooms in there. Alright, so now I got my meat pretty much dispersed evenly. It wasn't real perfect, I'm sure, but it's fine. You can do, I would say, probably a quarter to a half pound, and a half pound to 3/4 of a pound of meat in here. Next thing that I'm going to put in is my 1 teaspoon of garlic. You can use fresh, you can use dried. I just do a little bit over a teaspoon, heaping teaspoon. This is just fresh minced garlic. Set this aside. You can add thyme to this. Thyme is in the recipe. I'm not going to put thyme in mine, but you could do that. Half cup of carrots per each. So as you're cutting your carrots, just go for 3.5 cups for 7 quarts. Or close to it. And then the little bit that you have extra, I just disperse it around to each one. Alright, so I'm going to finish this first jar. Half cup of celery, half cup of onion. We're going to push that down in there some. And then I'm going to come in the rest with mushrooms. And I'm just going to push those in there like that. And that jar's done. And the only thing we're gonna do after this is we're gonna add our beef stock to this and a little salt. So once I get all these jars completed, I'll come back and we'll do our liquid and our salt. Okay, so I have my bouillon here, my beef stock, but the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a teaspoon of salt in each one of these. That way when you pour your stock in, it'll kind of melt down into. So with my stock, I just bring it to a simmer, and then as soon as it's at a simmer on the stove, I'll turn it off. This is about 2.5 quarts. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour that in. You're gonna want a 1-inch headspace on this. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and fill the rest of these, and I'll come back when we go to debubble and check our headspace line. Okay, so just grab your debubble tool and just go around each side. There's gonna be quite a bit of air in these because there is a lot of chunks in here. So just making sure that you're getting as much air out of these as you can. Going down the middle too. And then just push your vegetables kind of back down in there. And if you need to add a little bit more of your stock to get to that 1-inch headspace, then just adjust that. And do this with every jar. And as soon as I'm done with this part, then I will come back and show you how to get the lids, rings on, wipe your rims, and everything else from this point forward. Okay, so the one thing I do want to show you that I forgot is checking headspace. And here's my tool here. And you're just gonna set it on this very bottom, or the highest notch up, and that's your 1-inch headspace. And you're just gonna go through all your jars and check and make sure that your liquid level line is to there. Just like that, set it on the edge. Just make sure it touches that liquid level. It's just resting on top of the liquid level. So like this one could use a little bit more. So I'm gonna add that, and then we're gonna get our vinegar wipe, and we are gonna clean these rims. Okay, so I just have some white vinegar here, and I'm just gonna take my paper towel, just grab my white vinegar, get my towel nice and wet there. And then we're just gonna wipe the rims with this vinegar. Also checking again to make sure there's no cuts or cracks or blemishes in your tops of your jars here. And then just go over all of them, make sure they're nice and clean. The vinegar will cut any fat content off the top, so that way you can get yourself a good seal when you put your lids on. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and put my lids on. And then just add your bands. The only thing I do with my jars is I put the jars in hot soapy water along with the rings and the lids, and I just let them soak for a little bit, and then I rinse them and I just set them on my towel. I don't keep them hot or anything like that either. And then just finger tight. It's just like it sounds, just using your fingers to tighten the lids. And that's it. Now we're gonna load up our canner with these jars. All right, so let's load up our canner. Okay, so my canner is loaded up now, and I'm just gonna grab my lid, make sure that you can see through your vent pipe, and I can. This is a 23 quart Presto, and with mine, it is a dial gauge canner, and I have arrows. There's arrows on mine, and I just line up arrow to arrow here. Just set that on, give it a twist, lock it into place, and we're just gonna wait for this to come up to a vent now. I'm gonna have my heat about medium, a little more than medium, and I'm just gonna wait for this pipe to start venting. Okay, so just a couple of things that I wanted to talk about with this recipe. So I switched out the potatoes for the mushrooms, and I did a 1 pound package of mushrooms. I got whole mushrooms and then I sliced them. I did about 3 large onions and about 8 to 10 good sized carrots. Like I say with the carrots, if you have a lot of carrots, just measure as you go to get to about 3.5 cups, because it's a half a cup. I did half a cup per jar. And you can do a little extra than that too if you'd like. And then I did a full bag of celery, like a full head of celery, and that gives me about the right amounts that I need. And about a half a pound to 3/4 pound of the beef. So I had about a 4-pound roast, so that would be about half a pound or a little more per jar. So with this recipe, it wouldn't be finished for me. I would pour out my broth when I go to cook it and make it like a gravy. And I would probably use at least 2 jars for my family. We're a family of 8. So I would pour that broth out and thicken it, make it a nice thick gravy, then add my solids back into it and let them warm together. And then I would eat that over rice or mashed potatoes. That's why I switch out the potatoes for mushrooms, because I would like to have the option to eat it over like a mashed potato. So all we're doing right now is waiting for this to vent. The only other things I added in there was a tablespoon, or I'm sorry, like a heaping teaspoon of garlic, a teaspoon of salt, and that's it. If I feel like it needs something else later, then I will do it then, but that's how I like to make it. It's just pretty much a very basic recipe, and like I said, I'll thicken that and make it gravy afterwards and put it over something to make it go a little further. So we're waiting for this to vent, and as soon as it comes to a vent, I'll be back. Alright, so now we're at a pretty steady vent, and what you're looking for is just a solid flow of steam. I mean, it'll stop some, but you just want to be making sure that this has a pretty constant, steady flow of steam coming out. So you want to set your timer for 10 minutes at this point, because what you're doing with the canner right now is you're replacing the air that's inside your canner with steam, and the steam and the pressure is what is going to get those jars up to the temperature needed to kill anything that should not, or that would spoil your food. So let it vent for 10 minutes once it gets to a pretty solid vent, and then after that we'll come back and I'll show you what to do next. Alright, so my timer ran out for my 10-minute vent, and all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my weight, and because this is a dial gauge canner, this is a 15-pound weight, there's no other option. So I'm just going to put it over the top, and at this point right now, there's a valve down here that has popped up, so I know that I'm going to start building pressure now. The valve is up. Here, I'll show you. This valve here is up. My vent pipe is covered. So now I'm going to wait for my dial to get to the pressure point that I need it to be at. For my elevation, it's 13 pounds of pressure. So don't do anything until you get to that point. Leave your heat at about medium or whatever you're comfortable with. And as soon as, I wouldn't have your heat on a high setting. If you have it on a high setting, you're going to start to build pressure so fast that you may not be able to control it when it gets to the point where it needs to be at. So I keep mine at about medium or a little bit past medium towards high, but not anywhere close to high. So I'm just going to wait for it to get to 13, and then as soon as it gets to your pressure point, then you can start your timer. So once this gets to 13, then I'm going to start my timer for 90 minutes. These are quarts with raw meat in them. Any type of meat or any type of bean, you're going to want to do in 90 minutes for quarts. If you happen to do pints, you can do those for 75 minutes. So once this goes through the process, I'll bring it back and show you what they look like when they're all done. Okay, so my pressure has completely reduced. We went the whole 90 minutes. I kept it at the correct pressure. I was at state about 15. I need to be at 13, so 15 is just fine. You can go over, just don't go under. So my pressure I turned the heat off at the 90 minutes and I just walked away from it, and my pressure is completely reduced. My valve here has dropped. Be very careful, this is still very hot. And I'm going to take this off, make sure that no steam comes out. And it looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the lid and move it off quickly. Still steamy. Okay, so I'm going to pick one of these up. They've been in here, it's been sitting here for a little bit, so I can go ahead and remove one and it'll be okay. If you wait, and then right when that pressure valve drops, you go to take the lid off, let them sit in there a little while, just because, you know, they could still be somewhat siphoning if they were. You don't want that to squirt on you or anything like that. So here's what it looks like. A lot of the times when you do meat, it kind of looks gross. But try not to tip your jars. You could still have, the seal is probably not completely sealed yet, so liquid could still come out of the top. Okay. Okay, so that's gonna do it for me today. The only thing that I'm gonna do from here is I'm gonna remove all my jars and set them on a towel, and I'm gonna wait overnight till I mess with them. I'll let them fully seal, and then tomorrow morning I will remove the bands and I'll give them a wash. My jars a wash, and sometimes, you know, if they siphon, they're sticky on the sides or whatever, you just don't want that on your jars. So I always give my jars a wash, and then I date them and put what's in them. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's in the jar. Some things will look similar, like that would look similar to maybe like beef and mushrooms or something like that. So that's what I'll do. I'll date it, mark what's in it, and give them a wash, and I'll put them away on my pantry. But this is an excellent addition to your pantry. It's a good hearty meal. I was talking about I will thicken this when I go to reheat this, and I think I'll probably add a thing of the onion soup mix and maybe even like a cream of mushroom soup to it. I don't know. You could do anything you want with it to thicken it up, or just leave it like it is. So I have had some comments about how people will ask if I've opened up jars. So I wanted to say that I just canned not too long ago the 15 bean soup, and we opened one of those today to try because it's been a while. That's a fall thing. Soups are, you know, when it's colder weather, but we wanted to see if that turned out really good. 15 bean soup is always really good, but it didn't disappoint. It was really, really good. So if you haven't checked out that video, I'll link it above, and that one's a really good recipe. It's going to be an excellent addition for your pantry as well, along with any of the other recipes. But that's gonna do it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, if you'd give me a thumbs up and also hit that subscribe button, that would be awesome. And I'll see you in the next video.